So these are some different simple things you can do to prevent tension and make sure that you're using the most relaxed technique possible. So these are some very simple things to think about as you're playing. So the first thing is if you find yourself playing like this, we're using a lot of arm. You're exerting more energy than you need to. Remember we talked about the three primary motors in drumming, your smallest motor being the fingers, your medium motor, that's the one we really use the most, which is the wrist, and then the forearm. Not the whole arm, just the forearm. And believe it or not, we only really use this for things like buzz rolls, double stroke rolls, but single strokes is really more from the wrist. And again, it's not like exact gradations, right? It's maybe like 95% wrist, 5% forearm, or like 80% wrist, 20% fingers. But for right now, we want to focus on really building a wrist technique, because out of the three motors, fingers, wrist, forearm, I feel that the wrist is the most crucial part for a lot of our playing. So one thing you can do as a very simple warm-up exercise, if you're finding yourself using the whole arm, literally take just a few minutes at the start of your practice session to be like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm literally going to hold my forearm down. So if you find yourself warming up like this, that's not doing you any favors. Hold your arm in place and then really focus on just using your wrist. This looks silly, but it's a simple thing you can do to really program your body, build that muscle memory of the wrist is where the action's happening. Do the same thing, right, with the left hand. And again, you can do this while you're watching TV, just kind of chilling, right? This is something you can do to really condition, right, to do that. And that way, when you go to play, you're just using the wrists, and it's very natural. There's a flow there. Because what we're going for as drummers is a flow state, and that's something that you can do to achieve that. Now, another thing that we often find when we're using too much arm is that we're kind of throwing the whole arm down. So another thing you can do is literally glue your arms to the side like this. It looks awkward, and this is not actually a way I would recommend playing. Like, you don't want to be like playing drum set or snare or whatever, be like that's awkward. That doesn't look, natural. But for the purposes of, okay, I'm using too much of my arms, especially the whole arm, or even if it's just the forearm, glue your arms to the side like this. Bring them in, have them glued, and then do just alternating strokes. Because everything is locked in terms of my arm, I'm almost forced to use my wrist. So this is basically the equivalent of this, but if you want to have both hands going at the same time. And then when you go to play normally, now one thing I want to talk about, you may have noticed that my arms are directly at my side. One thing that we've been working on is the arms are kind of back here, right? So when you're playing, your arms are kind of back here a little bit, right? Some people I've worked with, their arms come too far out or kind of extend out like this. Thinking about the natural position of the sticks, think about just drop your arms to their side and then just bring, not your whole arm, but your forearm up. Notice how I'm not scooching the arms back or shooting forward. So what I recommend doing is just being cognizant of, are my arms, my elbows specifically, at my side and just in a relaxed position. Ask yourself, how would I sit if I wasn't playing drums and just sitting somewhere in maybe like a stool with no back or arms, like a chair. And if you're sitting, you're probably going to be like this or this. In both those cases, notice that the arms are exactly parallel to both sides of my rib cage here, right? You probably want to sit like this or this. So always ask yourself that. Good. One other thing I want to talk about is the rebound stroke. We were talking earlier about as you get better at just keeping a steady rhythm and playing clean, accurate rhythms, you also want to think about tone production. The middle of whatever drum you're playing is going to be the least resonant point on that drum. So when you're playing on a practice pad, do the same thing. Kind of think about that exact central point as your target. Now, if I'm doing all downstrokes and I'm not rebounding, but I want to hit in the same target with both sticks, this is inevitably going to happen. And so, right, one thing you mentioned is that when you're practicing, you find yourself doing a lot of this. that's actually good because it means you are aiming for that central target, which is good, but this is where that rebound or piston stroke comes into play. So thinking about like bouncing a basketball or a hot tea kettle that you're touching, think about as soon as the stick hits the surface, it's automatically rebounding like a piston. And the way I like to think about this is minimize the amount of time the stick actually spends on the surface of the drum. I'll say that again. Minimize the amount of time the stick is spending on the surface of the drum. So if you're starting up here, we return to that starting height as soon as possible. And this is all types of strokes, so loud accents. By the way, notice I'm not using any forearm, it's all wrist, even to get those big accents. I'm doing little ghost notes, right? Doesn't matter, I'm returning to whatever that starting height is. So in this case, I have a very low starting height. Here I have a higher starting height. But you're always returning to that. And that way when you go to play and you're aiming for that direct center of the drum, it's a higher stick height. This is sort of my ceiling. Let's say I have a lower stick height like here. Right? And when I move faster, what ends up happening is I'm still coming up to this starting height. I'm not going, right? So think about that. One last thing to think about too is when you're playing, be cognizant of what's happening with your spine and your shoulders. One of the biggest things, and this is not just you, this is everybody I've been working with, most students I've worked with, is when we're reading a piece of music and we're trying to get the rhythm right and we're trying to think about what the band is playing, we have all these different variables happening simultaneously. And so we kind of go into this kind of mode where there's a lot of tension. And where that tension often starts is in this area and then creeps down to the shoulders, top of the spine, and this kind of blocks or freezes our motors all the way down from here to here. So really making an effort, and practicing in front of a mirror can really help with this, really making an effort to, just even as you're warming up, be like, am I relaxed? If you find any tension, this is a common one I see, the shoulders up here. Well, that's not sustainable. And notice this, by the way, I'm not changing the pressure on the stick, I'm not changing anything with what I'm doing with my hands, but I am changing what I do with my head, top of my spinal cord, and my shoulders. And listen to the difference in sound. Here's me playing relaxed. Right? Subtle, but you could hear a little bit of a difference in what I was playing. So avoid this, avoid anything that's going to be creating tension in the body, stay relaxed, and you'll be good to go.